Неожиданный шаг в самый разгар предвыборной президентской кампании.
Здравствуйте, на Первом канале «Вечерняя новость».
Неожиданный шаг в самый разгар предвыборной.
Необходимо было предвидеть.
Вернусь к ситуации с запуском баллистических ракет. Только что мы получили комментарий главкома ВМ.
Imagine a country where the nightly news was your nation's leader and the weather.
На будущее.
Imagine if television portrayed your nation's leader as a hero among men.
Знаменитые высотки на Воробьевых горах.
Imagine if the only news about him was good. Welcome to Putin's Russia. Whether it's braving Arctic cold to watch a rocket launch, or mixing it with Russia's fighting men, or plunging to the ocean depths on a nuclear submarine, President Putin is always the biggest story.
При этом массовым явлением стали многомесячные задержки с выплатой пенсий, пособий, заработных плат.
In most of Russia, democracy is a dirty word. Zvenigorod, meaning the town that rings, is just a 40-minute drive from Moscow. But it has seen few benefits from more than a decade of Western-inspired reform. Its Soviet-era factories and collective farms are bankrupt and abandoned. Valentina Fomina was once a proud tractor driver for a cattle collective. Now she and her husband Vasily can't even afford to feed themselves. This cow is the only thing that keeps them going.
Ну, при советской власти мы жили лучше, чем сейчас живем. Ну, тяжеловато. На пенсии никак мы не обходимся.
А чё, скотина?
Хочется ведь, хочется и того купить.
Молочка
Есть, а
надо,
что?
купи. Где ее
Хлеб дорожает с каждым днем. Вот был по 10 рублей черный, сегодня уже 10-40. Также батон. Все дорожает.
Тяжело, тяжело.
And they blame politicians for their troubles, including Putin.
Вот и Ельцин у нас все это разворочил-то. Как Ельцин,
Горбачев.
впрочем, Горбачев начал, Ельцин доделал, а Путин сейчас, разве он восстановит Путин сразу за 3 года или за 4? Не восстановит. Ну, тоже он идет по ельциновским стопам. Тоже так.
Все дорого. Все дорого. Это куда нафиг?
But like almost everyone here, Vasily and Valentina plan to vote for Putin. Not because they particularly like him, but because they don't see any alternative.
Ну, а кто будет?
Ну, наверное, за Путина, за кого будем голосовать?
Ну, наверное,
Пусть
за него.
доделывает дальше. Поднимет
Это
он нас, как говорится, или нет.
Уже там
Или
его
там
выбрали.
разварить. Да,
Да,
там
это
же
вот.
все сделано.
It is just 4.5 years since Putin emerged from the bureaucratic shadows as Boris Yeltsin's hand-picked successor. A former KGB spy, he has played up to Russians' nostalgia for Soviet greatness. He's filled the Kremlin with generals, police chiefs and spooks. But for all the appearance of authority, he is seen by many, if not most, as the lesser of evils.
You know, 78% of Russians are going to vote for their incumbent president, but at the same time, only 15% of those who are coming to the polls and going to support Putin, only 15% are quite sure that Putin is a successful leader. Everybody else is thinking that, well, just, you know, shallow, insignificant guy, and he has failed nearly in everything. So people are going to vote for Putin because they don't see a viable alternative.
The alternative they can see is the legacy of Yeltsin. His Western-inspired policies created an astonishingly unequal society. While 37 million Russians live below the poverty line, Moscow has become a boomtown of luxury stores and designer shoppers. The huge wealth is enjoyed by a tiny minority, grown rich through the fire sale of state assets to Kremlin-connected tycoons. And the blame for the mess has fallen most directly on pro-Western parties. In December's parliamentary elections, Liberal parties were wiped out, failing to gain a single seat. Grigory Yavlinsky heads the once influential Democratic Party, Yabloko.
Our main responsibility is the criminal reforms in Russia. Criminal privatization in the middle of 90s, 2 wars in Chechnya, which one war is still there. Those people who were calling themselves liberal democratic forces failed completely, and that is the outcome of that. The problem is that these people never been liberal democratic forces, but what happened to my party that we failed to explain to the voters that the democracy can be real. They don't believe anymore.
Against this, Vladimir Putin has made some modest strides. He's reformed the tax system and reversed the country's economic slide, thanks largely to the good fortune of rising oil prices.
The society trusts Putin because Putin has stabilized the situation, and at least Putin is paying wages and salaries. And this is very important for the Russian electorate.
So it's very low expectations, but he's meeting them.
Yes, low expectations and the question of apprehension. People are afraid that anybody new will change the situation for worse. And overall, President Putin is the president of hope. But we also know that hope is always prerequisite for disappointment.
Putin has also made serious mistakes, but the heavy hand of the state has ensured they are not widely seen. His first term saw a series of police raids and criminal investigations of Russia's new media tycoons. The most prominent fled the country to escape tax and fraud charges. Their TV stations came under tight state control. Networks that were once critical of the government, often at their owners' bidding, became strangely compliant. Ivan Rybkin is a rival presidential candidate and close associate of exiled media magnate Boris Berezovsky.
Прежде всего были уничтожены независимые средства массовой информации. Просто раздавлена свобода слова. Все 6 каналов огосударствлены и, собственно, подчинены Путину и его команде. Мы вернулись к Леониду Брежневу, и, может быть, даже еще хуже.
Now, editorially, you won't find censors in this newsroom. No censorship per se. There are editorial approaches, but then you have to be loyal to your employer, which is normal.
Sergei Brylyov is one of the leading presenters on Russia's second state network, RTR. He acknowledges that coverage of Putin is more favourable than it was of Yeltsin, but denies the station has become a Kremlin mouthpiece.
He's been a tremendously successful president so far. The coverage of his has been the coverage of so many breakthroughs. Seriously. Although I personally think that as we say, the power in this country, whether it's legislative or executive, certainly deserves, if not more criticism, then tougher approach.
Putin certainly looks successful if you watch Russian news. Every week, Russian soldiers are killed in the ongoing war in Chechnya. But while television is full of stories of the war in Iraq, Russia's own casualties almost never rate a mention.
It seems to me it's the self-censorship on the part of journalists. They know that if they describe the carnage in Chechnya, if they describe unpleasant things that are happening in Russia, hardly they will be invited to continue their job.
Former contenders for the presidency have decided it's not worth even trying to compete.
I'm not going to take part.
You're not going to vote even?
No, I'm not going to take part. Publicly and officially. I'm going to say there is no elections. This is not an election. This is a referendum about the support of Mr. Putin.
Even the communist leader Gennady Zyuganov, who almost won the presidency in '96, has pulled out of the race, nominating a deputy who's polling just 5%. The most outspoken politician in Russia, the ultra-nationalist Vladimir Zhirinovsky, has also decided not to compete. He's enjoying the good life while his bodyguard stands as the party's candidate to rule Russia.
Развитие животноводства должно датироваться государством.
Former boxer Oleg Malyashkin is expected to get less than 1% of the vote. There's a sense they're all just going through the motions. Once a week or so, the candidates converge on a studio for a mandatory televised debate. But few bother to watch. The candidate everyone knows is going to win, Vladimir Putin, refuses to take part.
This is the most dirty campaign for me. Instead of political elections, they want to have political show. Mr. Putin had a good chance for the first time in the Russian history to make these elections justful and open. Unfortunately, he didn't use this chance.
But Putin is there in spirit. The fifth candidate, Sergei Mironov, is a Kremlin plant. His role is to make sure the election can still go ahead if the other candidates pull out. He uses the airtime to praise Putin and to attack Putin's rivals. One candidate who couldn't join this debate was Ivan Rybkin. He was in London, recovering from what he claimed was a kidnapping. On February 5th, he disappeared for 5 days, later declaring he had been drugged and then videoed in a compromising position.
Я не знаю, кто это сделал, но я знаю точно, кому это выгодно. Выгодно прежде всего окружению президента. И не только властному окружению, но и бизнес-окружению, которое плотно окружает сегодня Владимира Путина и на которых он во многом работает.
Last Friday, Rybkin pulled out of the race. Rybkin was once a key Kremlin official, serving as national security advisor to Boris Yeltsin. Russian media ridiculed his kidnapping claims, but the Kremlin has been linked to dirty tricks in the recent past. In 1999, the Prosecutor General Yuri Skaratov was secretly videotaped with 2 prostitutes while his office was investigating Kremlin corruption. The tape mysteriously made its way to state television.
If these people would consider that that's important for the state, for this or other reason, then there is no limits. They think that that is the way to protect the state.
Putin has maintained a statesmanlike aloofness from the political fray, declining to use free airtime for campaign advertisements. He can afford not to. When he addressed his campaign workers last month, along with 600 journalists flown in from around the country, state TV broadcast the whole speech live.
Сегодня же мы ощущаем время неопределенности и тревожных ожиданий прошло. Наступил новый период. Период работы над созданием условий для перехода к принципиально лучшему качеству жизни.
Putin will begin his second term as the most powerful Kremlin ruler in decades, with a compliant state media, a loyal parliament, and an overwhelming if grudging mandate. His re-election will mark the beginning of a new political epoch, free of the shadow of Boris Yeltsin's turbulent reign. It may also mark the end of Russia's brief and strange experiment with liberal democracy.